Joe Walsh, the legendary guitarist of the Eagles, the man who once made the whole world sway with Hotel California and Life in the Fast Lane, was also the one who repeatedly pushed his own life into the abyss. Walsh stood as a wild, untamed figure, both genius and reckless. He was once called the free spirit of the Eagles, the man who turned Hotel California into immortality with a riff and solo no one could ever forget. But behind the stage lights, Walsh embodied every contradiction that rock itself carries, dazzling yet lonely, a legend yet shattered by his own lifestyle. A childhood scarred by losing his father in a plane crash, long years drowned in addiction, broken marriages, and the unbearable pain of losing his young daughter in a tragic accident. All of it made Joe Walsh's life resemble a song flickering between light and darkness. And yet, the unexpected twist is that this journey did not end in collapse, but opened into a late hymn of love, redemption, and peace. At 77, Joe Walsh publicly confessed to the world that Marjorie Bach, the woman he married in 2008, is the love of his life. A confession that might sound ordinary, but for Walsh, it marked the end of decades of silence and self-destruction. Today, the guitar legend is no longer remembered only for fiery solos, but also for a simple message. Even after a lifetime of ruin, one can still find true happiness. Joe Walsh was born on November 20th, 1947, in Wichita, Kansas. His childhood was overshadowed early by a tragedy that would never fade. His biological father, Robert Newton Fiddler, a United States Air Force pilot, was killed in a plane crash when Joe was only 2 years old. It was not just a family loss, but an early wound that robbed the boy of a masculine anchor to grow up with. Later, his mother remarried, and Joe took the surname of his stepfather, Walsh. Yet the faint memory of his biological father, along with the name Fiddler, remained with him as a quiet legacy. He grew up feeling as though he carried two identities, the son of the man who had passed, and the child learning to fit into a new family. The Walsh family never stayed in one place for long. They moved several times, from Kansas to Columbus, Ohio, then to Colorado, in search of a new beginning after the loss. But for Joe, every move meant being uprooted, making it harder to bond with friends, harder to feel a true sense of home. That rootlessness, that loneliness, would leave its mark on his personality, an artist's soul, deeply sensitive to rupture and loss. Music came to him as a salvation. In their modest home, an old guitar, barely noticed by anyone else, became the only friend Joe felt he could rely on. He spent hours learning chords, replaying melodies from the radio. The Ventures, then the Beatles, became his inspiration. But above all, the thick, warm bass lines of Motown legend James Jamerson left a lasting impression, planting in him a special love for rhythm. Even with physical and psychological challenges, Joe refused to give in. He was born with a fused pinky finger on his left hand, meaning he couldn't fully use all 4 fingers to play the guitar. Most people would have given up. Joe instead taught himself to play with only 3 fingers, inventing a different way of fingering chords, something that would eventually become part of his unique style. On top of that, attention deficit disorder, ADHD, made it hard for him to concentrate, yet also gave him explosive energy, a capacity to throw himself completely into music and break past normal limits. As a teenager, Joe began stepping out of his private world to embrace collective music making. He joined school bands, playing at small parties, local bars, or regional weddings. It wasn't yet a career, just makeshift stages under dim yellow lights, with audiences often more focused on their beers than the music. But for Joe, every performance pushed loneliness into the background, replaced by drums and guitars blending together with friends. After graduating high school, he enrolled at Kent State University, Ohio in the late 1960s, a time when America was consumed by debate and protests over the Vietnam War, with universities as hotbeds of turmoil. Joe was just an ordinary student then, with no clear path except for his passion for music. But it was there that he witnessed one of modern America's darkest moments, a turning point that would shape the rest of his life. On May 4, 1970, on the Kent State campus, the National Guard opened fire on a crowd of student protesters. Joe was there that day. Shots rang out, tear gas filled the air, students fled in panic. When the chaos subsided, 4 students lay dead on the ground, 9 others wounded. The scene etched itself into Joe's mind, leaving a scar that would never heal. Years later, he admitted, "I couldn't go back to school after that day. Everything had changed." For Joe Walsh, the Kent State massacre was not just a political tragedy, it was a personal awakening. He dropped out after only 1 semester, abandoning academics altogether. His choice to throw himself into music was not merely the pursuit of passion. It was his only way to leave behind a world he had just seen prove itself cruel and unjust. Out of that tragedy, Joe Walsh stepped fully into music, as though it were his last escape and the only path left for survival. After leaving Kent State, Joe Walsh never looked back. The massacre had extinguished in him any illusion of pursuing an academic path or a stable career. Music became the only road he trusted, not out of dreams of glory or stage lights, but because it was the one thing that made the world still feel meaningful, worth living for. In the early days, Joe played in local bands to make a living, performing at bars, weddings, and student parties. One of the most memorable groups was the Nomads, where Joe first began to draw attention with his distinctive guitar style, explosive yet rhythmically sensitive. Friends recalled that even when the audience was noisy and indifferent, Joe would play as if he were on stage at Madison Square Garden. The real turning point came in the late 1960s, when he was invited to join James Gang, a rock band from Cleveland. At the time, James Gang was only a regional act struggling to find its identity. Joe's arrival quickly changed the game. With his powerful guitar style, sharp riffs, and solos that were both wild and structured, he injected new life into their music. After only a few shows, James Gang evolved from a bar band into a group playing large stages, soon recognized as part of America's emerging hard rock wave. The song Funk 49 was born during this period, becoming a hit and Joe Walsh's first mark on the American rock map. The track showcased what fans would later call the Walsh sound, a strange fusion of freewheeling improvisation and rhythm as tight as steel. Many critics remarked that James Gang was the perfect launching pad for Joe to establish himself within the exploding hard rock scene. Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin once said he was deeply impressed by Joe's energy and sense of freedom on the guitar, a compliment strong enough to mark Walsh as a standout face in an era overflowing with guitar heroes. However, tensions within James Gang soon surfaced. The band was creatively limited, while Joe grew increasingly hungry for freedom and experimentation. By 1971, after 3 albums and countless tours, he decided to leave. It was a difficult but necessary choice, leaving behind a strong mark, but one that couldn't fully satisfy his musical thirst. Wasting no time, in 1972, Joe formed Barnstorm with drummer Joe Vitale and bassist Kenny Passarelli. Though they worked as a band, most albums were released under Joe Walsh's name, making Barnstorm more of a disguised solo project. Among the 3 albums they released, the standout was Rocky Mountain Way, 1973. The song was not just a hit, but also Joe's personal musical manifesto, slow yet expansive in its feel, lyrics reflecting freedom and the dusty spirit of the American West. It was also one of the first songs to creatively use the talkbox effect on a rock stage, becoming a signature hallmark of his sound. Barnstorm's early records showcased not only Joe's guitar virtuosity, but also his songwriting ability, blending classic rock with shades of melancholy blues and bursts of raw improvisation, as if any idea could ignite into music. While not commercial blockbusters, Barnstorm proved that Joe Walsh was no longer just a hired gun. He was an independent artist with a clear identity and stature. By the mid-1970s, Joe's reputation had spread far beyond Ohio and Colorado. He was invited to collaborate with major artists like B.B. King and Dan Fogelberg, not only as a guitarist, but also as a studio musician and songwriter. Thanks to his versatility, Joe could slide into blues, country, or rock, while still keeping his own distinct voice. These collaborations enriched his musical knowledge and reinforced his standing as a respected guitarist in the industry. Joe Walsh's solo career at that point hadn't yet exploded on the charts, but it laid the foundation. And it was precisely his daring spirit, his wild style, and his unmistakable sound that soon caught the eye of a band searching for transformation, the band that would elevate him to immortal heights, the Eagles. When Joe Walsh officially joined the Eagles in 1975, many in the industry doubted whether such a wild guitarist could fit into a band known for polish, discipline, and rich harmonies. But it was precisely Joe's excess that became the missing piece, injecting the Eagles with new energy to break free from their safe country rock shell and charge headfirst into the arena rock era. Everything exploded with Hotel California, 1976, the album that turned the Eagles into legends. In the studio, Joe Walsh came in with a riff that roared like an engine racing down a highway. That was Life in the Fast Lane. At first, Don Henley was skeptical, thinking the riff was too wild for the Eagles' style. But Glenn Frey immediately recognized its value. This is gold. Let Joe do what he does best, and then we'll add our magic on top. After heated debates, Henley relented, and the song became an anthem. With razor-sharp riffs and a relentless beat, Life in the Fast Lane not only mirrored the band's chaotic lifestyle in the 1970s, but also redefined how the public saw the Eagles. No longer just a tame country rock outfit, but a true rock powerhouse. If Life in the Fast Lane cemented Walsh's mark on the band, then Hotel California made him immortal. The iconic hit closes with one of the most legendary dual guitar solos in rock history, a dialogue between Joe Walsh and Don Felder. The two guitars intertwined, lifted each other, and then clashed, creating a climax that was both mesmerizing and haunting. No one could tell anymore where Walsh ended and Felder began, their sounds fused into one, pulling listeners into a musical labyrinth with no exit. Critics hailed it as the greatest guitar duel of the 1970s. Guitar World ranked the solo at number 8 on its list of the 100 greatest guitar solos of all time. Fans simply called it the scream of heaven and hell at once. For Joe Walsh personally, it was the moment he stepped out of the shadows of James Gang and Barnstorm to become an irreplaceable part of the Eagles' machine. Hotel California was not only a commercial triumph, selling more than 26 million copies in the US alone and standing as one of the best-selling albums of all time, but also an artistic peak, where Walsh left an unmistakable mark: rebellion, abandon, and unmatched technique. From being seen as a misfit guitarist, he had become the spirit that shaped the Eagles' new sound, one the world would forever associate with rock's golden age. After Hotel California, the Eagles entered their most glorious era, but also one marked by escalating tensions. The massive success altered the band's internal balance. Don Henley and Glenn Frey became the dominant duo, controlling nearly all songwriting and strategic decisions. They were the architects of the Eagles' music, but their authority widened the gap with the other members. Don Felder, the guitarist who had created the legendary Hotel California solo alongside Walsh, grew increasingly frustrated. He wanted a larger role in songwriting and a fairer share of profits, but Henley and Frey kept a tight grip on power. Felder's resentment simmered, planting the seeds of conflict that would later erupt. Meanwhile, Joe Walsh fully embodied the fast lane lifestyle. Success, money, and the spotlight dragged him deeper into alcohol and excess. Nights of cocaine, booze, and endless partying turned him into the band's wild rock mascot, standing in stark contrast to Henley's almost militant discipline. Walsh often showed up drunk, sometimes bringing sloppy humor on stage, leaving the band in awkward situations. The first major breaking point came in Knoxville, 1977. Randy Meisner, the bassist with the angelic falsetto, was under crushing pressure to sing "Take It to the Limit" as the encore every night. One night, sick with fever and stomach pain, Meisner refused. Glenn Frey exploded, yelling in his face, "You've got one job and you can't even do it!" The argument turned into a backstage brawl. Meisner, introverted and gentle by nature, could take no more. After the Hotel California tour, he quietly left the band, leaving a void both musically and emotionally. But the tensions didn't end there. In Long Beach, California, 1980, during a concert that the audience never suspected, years of built-up resentments boiled over right on stage. Don Felder and Glenn Frey had a furious shouting match mid-performance, nearly coming to blows. Joe Walsh, already drunk, cracked jokes that only made the chaos worse. After that show, Henley declared he could not go on, and the Eagles officially broke up. The glory of Hotel California quickly gave way to internal collapse. What the audience saw was just a great band vanishing after the lights went down. But for Joe Walsh and his bandmates, it was a rupture beyond repair. A clear reminder that success can sometimes be the very fire that burns a musical family to ashes. After the Eagles spiraled into breakup, Joe Walsh refused to sit still. He poured his creative energy into a solo career and immediately struck gold with the album But Seriously Folks, 1978. It became the most important milestone of his individual career, featuring the hit Life's Been Good, a song at once humorous and bitter, directly satirizing the lavish, reckless, and meaningless lifestyle of 1970s rock stars. Life's Been Good not only climbed the charts, but also stood as a half-joking, half-confessional statement. Joe both mocked the absurd wealth and chaos of his own life, while proving himself self-aware enough to expose the dark side of fame. Entering the 1980s, Joe released albums such as There Goes the Neighborhood, 1981, and Ordinary Average Guy, 1991. While they didn't match the commercial peak of But Seriously Folks, they showcased a Walsh who was witty, often self-deprecating, with lyrics full of satirical takes on everyday life. He refused to chase glossy pop rock trends, keeping his own voice intact, a blend of wild abandon, biting humor, and a layer of melancholy hidden beneath the laughter. Yet behind those memorable albums and the riffs that made crowds roar, Joe Walsh's personal life was caught in a downward spiral. He sank into heavy drinking, cocaine, and sedatives, to the point where he often went weeks barely conscious. Walsh admitted that he couldn't step on stage without downing several bottles of liquor, and after the show he would keep running the marathon through all-night parties. His body became so dependent on stimulants that, according to friends, when deprived of alcohol or drugs, he would collapse into trembling panic. What made it worse was that he was also living with obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. Walsh once said he could spend hours checking and rechecking locks or wiping a table endlessly until exhaustion. On stage, his explosions of energy were sometimes pure talent, but at other times, the uncontrollable surges of ADHD. In life, the two conditions made him erratic, prone to anger, euphoric highs, and crushing lows. The American press at the time missed none of it. They branded him the backstage wrecking ball, the man who could tear apart any backstage he entered. Stories filled the tabloids. Walsh hurling a TV out of a hotel window, smashing up dressing rooms after arguments with crew, or turning a record company party into a disaster after drunkenly dropping a prized guitar into a swimming pool. These tales cemented him as a symbol of rock and roll excess, but also made promoters nervous about signing him. Though the madman image added to his rock star legend, it slowly ate away at his career. Colleagues kept their distance, Bands tired of managing his chaos, and his family life fell apart again and again. To fans, Joe Walsh became a living paradox. A guitar genius capable of solos that stunned the world, yet a man destroying himself at the height of his brilliance. The year 1993 marked the darkest turning point in Walsh's life, a rock bottom he later admitted, "If I hadn't changed, I'd have been dead long ago." On a flight to Paris for a performance, he fell into a blackout. So drunk he lost all awareness. Walsh had no memory of what he did during the flight, couldn't even piece together how the previous hours had passed. When he came to, what he saw wasn't the romance of Paris, but the exhausted, pitying eyes of the crew, bandmates, and friends. That moment shocked him. If he kept chasing booze and drugs, he wouldn't just lose his music and career, he would lose his life. Joe knew he had no choice but to face himself and enter rehab. It was a brutal fight, filled with days of agony, but it was the only way to survive. A year later, in 1994, fate handed Walsh a lifeline. The Eagles, who had broken up in the early 1980s amid tension and fights, suddenly announced their reunion with the legendary Hell Freezes Over tour. But Glenn Frey and Don Henley laid down one uncompromising condition: Joe has to be sober. No one in the band wanted to endure another scene of Walsh drunkenly wrecking backstage. It was the final warning, and this time, Joe kept his promise. When he walked on stage for the reunion, he carried a different aura. The guitar still blazed, the solos still burst like fire, but they were no longer fueled by chaos. He played with clarity and willpower, and the audience recognized a new Joe Walsh, still wild, but finally in control. From that year onward, he has remained sober for 3 decades, an almost unthinkable feat for someone once buried so deep in addiction. After Hell Freezes Over, Joe continued with the Eagles through every project and tour. Though his solo career never again soared, like in the But Seriously, Folks era, he left his mark with works like Analog Man, 2012. A rare but deeply meaningful project, seen as the voice of a matured Walsh, reflective, writing from the perspective of a man who had walked through hell and found peace. The music no longer chased frenzy but carried introspection, like a private dialogue between himself and the fans who had traveled alongside him for decades. More important than music, Joe Walsh discovered a mission beyond the stage. He became active in recovery programs, supported community groups, funded rehabilitation organizations, and even stood before audiences to share his own story. He poured special dedication into helping veterans and young people battling addiction, people in whom he saw his younger self. For Walsh, it wasn't just social charity, it was self-reminder. I have to stay sober, not just for me, but for everyone watching, for everyone who needs a reason to believe they can do it too. From once being branded the backstage wrecking ball, Joe Walsh has become a symbol of rebirth, a living testament that even at the lowest depths, a person can still rise again. After finding a measure of balance again through music, Joe Walsh also began his own journey of the heart. The first woman deeply tied to him was Margie, his first wife, whom he married in the late 1960s, at a time when he was still too young to fully understand the responsibilities of marriage. They met when Joe was still playing in small, unknown bands. Margie was drawn to his humor, his rebellious yet genuine outlook. For Walsh, Margie was the first piece that gave him a sense of family after a childhood marked by the loss of his father and constant relocations. But once married, youthful impulsiveness quickly revealed itself. Joe poured all his energy into music, rehearsals, and late-night gigs, while Margie longed for a stable home. Their married life felt like a train running at 2 different speeds. Joe rushed forward with his guitar and ambitions, while Margie struggled to hold on to a husband who was always away and increasingly caught up in all-night parties. Arguments became frequent. Joe craved freedom. Margie wanted a normal family. And though love still remained between them, the divide only grew deeper. What made the marriage even more fragile was the arrival of their first daughter, Emma Kristen. For Joe, becoming a father was both a shock and a joy. He had never imagined that he, a wandering musician, would shoulder such a responsibility. Emma was born in 1971, the one bright light keeping their small family together amid the turbulence. But tragedy struck too soon. In 1974, Emma died in a car accident at only 3 years old. Joe would later say in an interview, "Losing Emma destroyed me. I didn't know how to get through it." That loss ripped apart any hope of family happiness. Margie, already worn down by Joe's recklessness, now fell into despair watching him drown in alcohol and drugs to numb his grief. They could not save the marriage. It collapsed, leaving a void that neither would ever fill. This relationship with Margie was both a beginning and a wound, the first step in Joe Walsh's emotional journey. It gave him the feeling of being loved, of becoming a father, but it also hurled him into the abyss of loss and guilt. From then on, he would never look at marriage as something simple. In his heart, there was always the shadow of a daughter who would never grow up, and a first marriage shattered by tragedy. After that first broken marriage, Joe Walsh seemed ready to close off his heart. But in the early 1970s, as his career with the James Gang began to rise, he met Stephanie Rhodes, a woman who entered his life like a beam of new light. Stephanie was different from Margie, independent, vibrant, and captivated by Joe's wild artistic spirit. They quickly fell in love, and by 1971, they were married. At first, this marriage seemed like a new beginning. Joe was more successful, earning money from tours and albums, while Stephanie became his support, standing by him through his early triumphs. They shared a daughter, Emma Kristen, the hope of both their lives. Joe once said that the moments of holding Emma in his arms after a concert were the rare times he felt balanced between stage glory and real life. But then, the unthinkable struck in 1974. In a car accident, Emma, only 3 years old, was killed. Joe was at the height of his career, but the news shattered his inner world. He sank into guilt, blaming himself for not being there, and turned to alcohol and drugs to escape the indescribable pain. Stephanie's grief was no less, but instead of sharing it with her, she faced a husband slipping deeper into self-destruction. From then on, their marriage began to fracture. Stephanie tried again and again to pull Joe back, urging him to seek therapy, but Walsh only found escape in music and endless intoxication. He would later admit, "I didn't know how to love anymore after Emma was gone. All I knew was to play, to drink, and to destroy myself." By the late 1970s, his marriage to Stephanie quietly but painfully dissolved. She carried with her the memory of a once warm family, while Joe continued to carry the ghost of the past, the unbearable loss of a little girl that left his heart permanently scarred. The relationship with Stephanie Rhodes thus became the deepest etching in Walsh's life, a love both passionate and tragic, forever linked to the loss of a daughter that could never be replaced. It pushed him further down the road of addiction, but also planted in him a haunting wound, one he would later revisit again and again through his music. In the early 1980s, as Joe Walsh staggered between stage glory and long nights of addiction, another name entered his life, Juanita Jody Boyer. Unlike a love meant to heal, their relationship began amid smoke, music, and endless parties. Jody didn't arrive as a savior, but as a companion in the very chaos Joe was living. They married in 1980, right when the Eagles were entering their most turbulent phase. For Walsh, Jody was both a partner and a refuge after exhausting nights on stage. Together they had a daughter, Lucy Walsh, born in 1982. Lucy became a rare joy in Joe's alcohol and drug-soaked life. He once admitted, "Lucy was the only reason I knew I still had to wake up every morning." But there was a harsh truth. Love couldn't withstand the crushing weight of the rock star lifestyle. Walsh was already too deeply consumed by addiction, compounded by OCD and ADHD that made his moods volatile and explosive. Jody, meanwhile, carried the burden of family, a young child, and the absence of a husband who was perpetually drained and intoxicated after tours. Friends recalled that in their California home, arguments were frequent. Jody complained about Joe's absence, while Joe felt controlled. The gulf between them grew. Later, Lucy would admit that her mother was very lonely in that marriage, while her father was too lost to love fully. By 1988, the marriage ended in divorce. Joe left, carrying the guilt of failing as both husband and father. Jody chose a quieter life away from the spotlight, raising Lucy with care and protection. The marriage to Jody Boyer left Joe Walsh with a painful truth. He could conquer the world with his guitar, but he was powerless to hold together a family. Lucy remained the only bridge between them, a reminder that even when love ended, its traces were forever imprinted on Walsh's life. By the late 1990s, as the years of addiction began to recede and Joe Walsh found some peace in recovery, he met Denise Driscoll, who would become his fourth wife. This was no longer a rash marriage of youth, nor a bond scarred by tragedy like those with Stephanie or Jody. Instead, it came at a time when Joe seemed ready to live slower, more steadily. They married in 1999, when Walsh was in his 50s and had just completed a successful rehabilitation program. To many friends, it was the first time they saw him truly serious about maintaining a home. Denise was said to bring stability, a calmer daily rhythm, a partner who listened and understood. And yet, that calm was not enough to fill the emotional void within Joe. According to later reports, Denise often felt abandoned in her own marriage. Life with a former rock star, even sober, was still laden with pressure, long tours, relentless studio work, public attention, and the lingering ghosts of his past. In 2006, they divorced, citing irreconcilable differences. There were no fiery fights or public scandals, but the quiet rift was proof that even sober, Walsh had not yet found the formula for lasting happiness. That marriage ended as a kind of pause, not loud, not tragic, but unfinished, as though he had always been close to a home he could never fully hold. It seemed Joe Walsh's life would forever be a chain of broken loves and failed marriages until he met Marjorie Bach, the woman he would later call, with complete sincerity, the love of my life. They met in the late 2000s at a charity event in Los Angeles, just as Joe was struggling to maintain his sobriety. Marjorie wasn't a Hollywood starlet. She was the sister of actress Barbara Bach, Ringo Starr's wife, from an intellectual New York family, calm and private by nature. That very difference drew Joe in. He later admitted, "I spent my whole life looking for her, and finally, when I met Marjorie, I knew I had found her." They married in 2008 in a warm, modest ceremony, far from the showy weddings of his past. With Marjorie, Joe found something he had never had before: peace. She was not only his wife, but also his steady companion in resisting old temptations. She encouraged him to continue recovery programs, guided him toward healthier living, even experimenting with vegetarianism together. Don Henley once remarked in an interview, "Marjorie brought Joe the stability he needed all his life." This marriage, too, had its challenges. Joe's long tours often kept him away for months, while Marjorie, a private person, disliked media exposure. She even refused to attend one of Joe's album release events, unwilling to be in the spotlight. Such differences sparked arguments, but unlike before, Walsh had learned to listen. Together, they set boundaries to protect each other. Most importantly, Marjorie helped heal the rift between Joe and his daughter, Lucy Walsh. She encouraged him to call Lucy more often, join family gatherings, and rebuild the connection long lost. Lucy once wrote on social media, When my father talks about Marjorie, I see a man who is truly happy. She is our family. Joe's love for Marjorie even flowed into his music. His 2012 album, Analog Man, carried softer, brighter tones, reflecting the mindset of a man who had finally found a place to return to. At many shows, he openly thanked his wife, calling her the inspiration that taught him to slow down and feel every note. In his later years, by Marjorie's side, Joe Walsh was no longer the reckless, backstage wrecking ball, but a seasoned artist who cherished ordinary moments. This marriage stands as proof that, after so many detours, he finally found a true home. In his later years, Joe Walsh has never stepped away from the stage. Together with the Eagles, he continues to tour with The Long Goodbye, a farewell journey full of nostalgia, bringing timeless hits like Hotel California and Life in the Fast Lane to new generations of fans. On stage, his guitar remains as sharp as ever, but off stage, Walsh has completely changed, from a reckless wild man to someone who treasures peace. He lives in California with his wife, Marjorie Bach. Their life is surprisingly simple: gardening, tending flowers, meditating, and enjoying quiet. Walsh still holds on to a childhood passion: ham radio, under the call sign WB6ACU, where he often chats with anonymous friends on the airwaves. He is also a devoted collector of vintage cars, especially Cadillacs and Chevrolets from the 1960s, and sometimes repairs and drives them on long road trips to feel 20 again. In 2012, he released Analog Man, regarded as his most significant solo project in decades. The album's warm, gentle tone reflected Marjorie's influence, helping him slow down and find balance after years of chaos. She also encouraged him to record spontaneous riffs during practice, some of which evolved into full songs, most notably Lucky That Way. Walsh never stopped experimenting. In 2015, he planned Lost Tapes, a bold project blending blues with electronic sounds, a dramatic departure from his usual style. Yet Joe abandoned it, admitting, "I didn't feel it was perfect enough to release." For him, creativity is sometimes about exploration, not necessarily completion. Beyond music, Joe has poured his heart into community work. In 2017, he founded VetsAid, an annual concert series supporting U.S. veterans in need. Having lost his own father, an Air Force pilot, when he was only 2, Walsh saw this as both a personal tribute and his ultimate mission: to use music as a bridge to heal those forgotten after war. At 77, Joe Walsh has not chosen a life of seclusion. On the contrary, he still appears regularly on stage with the Eagles. In 2025, the band staged a series of special shows at the Sphere in Las Vegas, promoted as the most spectacular performances of their career. Every show sold out, forcing the band to add more dates in October. Though called The Long Goodbye, the tour once again proved that neither the Eagles nor Joe Walsh have ever truly left their audience. His guitar, fiery and instinctive, remains one of the irreplaceable souls of the stage. Alongside his busy schedule, Joe continues to nurture the charitable project he launched in 2017, VetsAid. In 2025, the event was held in his hometown of Wichita, Kansas, the place where he was born. On November 15th, thousands filled Intrust Bank Arena to witness a night featuring major names like Vince Gill, Ryan Bingham, Susan Tedeschi, Derek Trucks, and Nathaniel Rateliff. For Joe, bringing VetsAid back home was not only an act of gratitude, but also a way of affirming that the cycle of music and love always has a place to return to. He declared, "I left Wichita chasing a dream, but today I bring that dream back, to share with my hometown and with those who need help." Not only in music, Joe Walsh continues to affirm the love and peace he found with Marjorie Bach. In July 2025, at Ringo Starr's Peace and Love event, Joe recalled meeting Marjorie for the first time at Starr and Barbara Bach's home, a memory he described as the moment that changed my life forever. Before friends and fans, he openly called Marjorie the love of my life. After countless failed marriages and years of addiction, Marjorie's presence became the clearest proof that Joe Walsh had finally found his true home. The year 2025 thus not only marks the ongoing journey of a rock legend on the grand stage, but also portrays a Joe Walsh who has completed the full cycle of rebellion and arrived at serenity. An artist who still plays with all his heart, a man who knows how to cherish love, and a human being tirelessly sowing seeds of kindness back into the community. Joe Walsh leaves behind a very particular legacy in American rock history, not flashy like some of his contemporaries, but quietly enduring, etched deeply into songs and generations alike. His guitar sound, a fusion of fierce hard rock, free-spirited blues, and improvisation that felt like storytelling, helped define the sonic character of the 1970s. From Funk Nut 49 with James Gang, to Rocky Mountain Way with Barnstorm, to Life in the Fast Lane, and the legendary dual solo in Hotel California with Don Felder, each became a milestone in the story of rock. Masters like Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Pete Townshend have all admitted their special respect for Walsh, calling him one of the most unique guitarists they ever knew. Rolling Stone ranked him the 54 on its list of the 100 greatest guitarists of all time, recognizing both his technique and creativity. But more than accolades, he's remembered as an inspirer, someone who could ignite an entire hall with just a single riff. Joe's influence extended far beyond music. His personal story, from spiraling into addiction to reclaiming his life and remaining sober for 3 decades, made him a symbol of rebirth. The image of a rocker, once known as a backstage wrecking ball, now performing with clarity and dedicating himself to charity efforts like VetsAid, turned him into a living example for countless artists and young people fighting their own shadows. Walsh is also remembered as a connector. He never put himself at the center, but always found ways to blend in, whether with James Gang, Barnstorm, Eagles, or even in the supergroup The Best. Wherever Joe Walsh played, there was a balance between precision and emotion, between madness and discipline. This very flexibility made him an irreplaceable part of the Eagles, a band filled with towering egos and constant tensions. Now in his late 70s, Joe has nothing left to prove. He's not the type to write memoirs to justify himself, nor to mythologize his own name. Instead, he's chosen simplicity. Play music while he still can, give back when possible, love the woman by his side, and laugh at the mistakes that once defined him. Perhaps that is the hidden message of his life. A true artist isn't measured by how many peaks he reached, but by his ability to walk through darkness and still know how to smile and keep on playing. What do you think of Joe Walsh? A man both wild and deeply human, both lost and resilient. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss more stories of music's great legends.